Konnichiwa. Today we're going to talk about the word ki and various expressions that incorporate it, like kini suru, kigasuru, kini naru, kini-iru, and so forth. Now, people often find these confusing and difficult to work out exactly how it is that they're structured, how it is that they work, how we should use them. And there are two reasons for this. The first is that we need to understand what ki really means. And the second is that we need a very firm grip on the logical particles if we're going to differentiate things like kini suru, ki-ni-naru, ki-ga-suru from each other. And of course, if you learn conventional textbook Japanese, a firm grasp on the unchanging nature of the logical particles is exactly what you don't have. Because if you are taught things like kohi ga suki da means I like coffee, you never really understand what the unchanging nature of the ga particle, for example, is. And if you do have any doubts about the nature of the 5 main logical particles, I do recommend that you watch this video on the subject, because it is the very foundation of Japanese. If you're fuzzy about the logical particles, then you're fuzzy about Japanese, period. Alright, so what is ki? Ki comes from Chinese. The kanji is the same kanji that we have in Tai Chi. It's a Taoist concept and probably goes back to a time before what we now know as Taoism. To this day, the concept is used in Chinese medicine, Chinese and Japanese martial arts, and other areas. What it is the fundamental spirit or fluid energy in a person or something else. Originally it was associated with breath, and in many languages, breath and spirit are in fact the same word. Latin spiritus, Greek pneuma, Hebrew ruach, Sanskrit atma, all mean both breath and spirit. Now the breath meaning of ki is no longer active, but it's still this flowing spirit principle within a person. If we look at the kanji, interestingly, this part of it, which is also pronounced ki, means steam or vapor. So a ki-sha is a steam engine. And then we have this X, as it were, and here X really marks the spot. We have the fixed cross portion and we have the fluid vaporous portion. And both of those aspects of ki are important, and you can never entirely separate the two, although we can move from the fixed end of the scale to the fluid end of the scale. So to give examples of those two ends of the scale, let's take 2 expressions that you almost certainly know. The first is genki, the second is yaruki. Now, genki, as you know, is vigor or health. The gen means original, fundamental. So one's original ki is healthy and vigorous. If something goes wrong, we may become byoki, sick, or dispirited. And our aim is then to return our ki to its original healthy and vigorous state, to restore our genki. Yaruki is the will to do something. So it's the do spirit, get up and go spirit. And this kind of ki is not our basic ki that, in a sense, remains constant within us. It's a particular ki, the ki to do a particular thing. So we might say, Kaigai de benkyou suru ki ga aru. And what we're saying here is that a particular ki exists in us, that is, the ki to study abroad. So in this sense, ki is the will or inclination to do a particular thing. When we say ki o tsukeru, this literally means attach or stick a spirit. So if someone says kaidan ni ki o tsukeru, what they're literally saying is attach your spirit to the staircase. Now, what we'd say in English is watch out for the staircase, or take care on the staircase. Attach your spirit, your consciousness, your feelings, your thoughts to the staircase. Pay attention to it. Take care. And it may not be a particular thing. Very often people say, Kyotsukete, attach your spirit. And this is not attach it to any particular thing, but attach it to whatever it's appropriate to attach it to. Have situational awareness, as one might say in a more modern jargon. Take care. Now, when we get on to things like ki ni naru and ki ni suru, we've dealt in a previous lesson with ni naru and ni suru. So, for example, if we say sakura ga kaeru ni naru, we're saying sakura turns into a frog. If we say majo ga sakura o kaeru ni suru, we're saying that a witch turns sakura into a frog. And of course we know who is doing what because of the logical particles. So what does it mean when we talk about ki ni naru and ki ni suru? We're saying that something becomes our spirit. What do we mean by that? Well, to understand that, we need to understand something else. We need to understand that becoming a feeling, an emotion, the expression of emotion, is something that we do in Japanese. We don't do it in English. So, for example, in AKB48's song Heavy Rotation, we have the line, Konna kimochi ni nararu tte, boku wa tsuiteiru ne. And this means that I could become this feeling. I'm lucky, aren't I? Now in English we don't talk about becoming a feeling, but in Japanese we do talk about that. And I think this is somewhat connected with the concept of ki, and also with the Buddhist idea that there really is no self. What we are is not a fixed and absolute thing. The self is essentially a shifting congeries of actions and reactions, feelings and sensations. And so we may temporarily become a particular feeling. We may even become, in Japanese, the expression of a feeling. We may say, Shinkoku na hyojo ni naru. Someone became a grave or concerned face. For that moment, the whole person transformed into that expression of gravity and concern. Now this is what we're saying when we say ki ni naru and ki ni suru. If we say ano hito wa ki ni naru, we're saying that person turns into my spirit. My spirit is remolded, as it were, a certain part of it, for a certain period, into the form or shape of that person. What does that mean? It means that that person is, as we would say in English, occupying my feelings. Now this can mean a variety of things. It can mean that we're concerned or worried about that person. It can mean that that person intrigues us. It can mean that we feel there's some mystery about that person. But whatever it is, that person is occupying our feelings, our sensations, our thoughts. In Japanese, is becoming our feelings, our sensations, our thoughts, our ki. Now, an important thing to notice here is that we tend to see in grammar books and dictionaries, ki ni naru means this, ki ni suru means that. But the important thing to understand is that ki ni naru on its own doesn't mean anything. Neither does ki ni suru. Ki ni naru is the tail end of a complete logical clause. Naru is the engine. Ki ni is telling us more about the engine. The ekar in the case of ki ni naru is whatever it is that's occupying our thoughts, whatever it is that's turning into our spirit. So in this case, anohito is the ekar, and what we're saying about that person, what that person is doing, is turning into our spirit. Now when we take ki ni suru, we say anohito o ki ni suru. So now the doer of the action is not that person. The doer of the action is me. I am turning that person into my spirit. I am being concerned about that person, and that has two implications. One is that in a sense we're doing violence to our spirit. It's not just our spirit naturally becoming that person. We are making it so and that tends to give it a slightly more negative meaning, while naru can occupy a whole spectrum of meaning, from being intrigued to being worried. Suru usually means worried. Now the other implication it has is that we are in control of it. Our spirit isn't simply turning into that person, we are turning our spirit into that person, and that's why you often hear people say, ki ni shinaide, don't turn it into your spirit. It wouldn't make any sense to say ki ni naranaide, because you aren't making anything happen. Your spirit's simply turning into it, but ki ni shinaide is telling you to control something that you have control over. Don't turn it into your spirit. Don't worry about it. Don't be concerned. Now we have ki suru and ki naru. What about ki ga suru? Again, the particle gives us the clue to what's going on. When we say ki ga suru, it's the ki, the spirit itself, that's acting. It's not something becoming our spirit. It's not us turning something into our spirit. It's our spirit doing something, or a certain aspect of our spirit acting. Suru, do or act. How do we understand this? Well, again, we need to understand something else in Japanese before we can properly understand this. When we use expressions like ii nioi ga suru or kirei na oto ga suru, what we're saying is there's a good smell. There's a pretty sound. A pretty sound happened. A pretty sound acted. What we mean by suru in the case of a smell or a sound is the only thing a smell or a sound can do. A smell smells and a sound sounds. When we say nioi ga suru, we're saying a smell acts, a smell is active, I can detect a smell. Oto ga suru, a sound acts, a sound is active, I can detect a sound. When we say ki ga suru, we're saying a certain spirit, a certain thought, a certain consciousness is active, I can detect that consciousness, I can detect that feeling. So, if we say, damasarete iru yona ki ga suru, we're saying, I've got a feeling we're being deceived. I've got a feeling we're being tricked. Such a ki, such a feeling, is active. If we say, tsuyoku natta ki ga suru, we're saying, I feel that I got stronger. I sense that I got stronger. That spirit, that inclination of the emotions, of the thoughts, is active in the same way that a smell is active or a noise is active. Now, one last one that I think is more confusing than the others because essentially it uses a word in an uncommon way is ki ni iru. If we say sore o ki ni iru, we're saying I like that. Now, what we're really saying is that I'm letting that into my soul. What's confusing here is that iru is not being used in its normal way. Iru usually means to enter or come in. And if we're talking about putting something into something, we say ireru. But in this case, iru, probably because it's an older usage that's cemented into the language in this particular very common phrase. Iru actually means allow into one's spirit. So the one who is doing ki ni iru is oneself. And we know this is the case because that's the way the particles are working. We can always trust the particles. If the particles are saying one thing, and the form of the word is saying another, we can be confident in every case that the particles know what they're talking about, and the word may have changed its meaning over time. Ki ni iru is something you'll hear on various occasions, and a particular characteristic of this is that it's much easier to use it about other people than things like hoshi or suki. This is not to say that we can boldly state what other people like and what they don't like, even using ki ni iru, but if we're going to talk about other people's feelings, ask them about their feelings, suggest what their feelings might be. Ki ni iru is much politer than using terms like tai or suki or hoshi. So you'll very often see ki ni iru in references to other people's feelings as well as to one's own. So I hope this makes the whole ki usage a little clearer. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below and I will answer as usual. I'd like to thank my gold Kokeshi patrons who make all of this work possible, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere. Without you, I wouldn't be able to do any of this. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. これからもよろしくお願いします。Class dismissed.